experience with ODL. And so, Phil's making comments, in the back, if you get familiar with an ISP, that you have a group that, if you look at, it's pretty ugly. So we're in the trenches, bailing or pushing the coal into the fire of the OSS, hoping the controller will help us expedite the delivery of our new services quickly. So I'm going to go through the first part, which is really give you a feel for the common framework and the use cases that are driving the needs. And Brian is going to go through in depth our experience, our architecture, and our experience with ODL and what we are using in ODL. So I think a few people might have seen this because I've given this in a lot of talks, but just to set quickly the framework. So like I had said before, I think on the panel, we see three major components. And of course, there's other components, but three in this space. We have a service orchestrator in the orange. The colors mean something. Orange is usually orchestrators. And then you have a cloud orchestrator. And then in the green, we have the controller, which is intimately involved in managing, configuring, and managing the life cycles of the different functions. Here it says network functions, but as I said yesterday, that I started getting rid of the word network and actually just said functions, because like I said before, in AT&T, our application controller is actually now going to be using this architecture that we developed for the network, because we're realizing in the end, it doesn't matter. Once you virtualize, then the whole system actually is the same. I'm trying to go fast because I want actually Brian to speak. So this is probably the better slide of the controller model that we have. So like we were trying to say yesterday, we actually see a federation of controllers. So there's a global controller which provides end-to-end connectivity of the networks end-to-end, because we have a lot of different pieces. You have things in a data center, you have networks in the metro, networks in the WAN. And so this is sort of the glue for the end-to-end instantiation of networking. And it actually could have underneath it local controllers. Again, like I said yesterday, there's a set of local controllers that sort of expands all the different types of local controllers. And they are more intimately involved in maybe a certain type of technology. And due to that technology, the characteristics, the design and so forth needs to be very specialized so that that controller can optimally control that network element. And this shows sort of the areas that we're seeing sort of groupings. So we see in the virtual switch, virtual router world that we see a set of local controllers that are different from maybe the set of controllers related to a fabric switch, different from access, optical, and then of course the WAN. We also show here the federation, well, we obviously aren't going to be the only ones having controllers. We have other service providers that have controllers, so we need to have that interface. And then of course customers will have their set of controllers, so we will want this relationship of the customer controllers interfacing with our federation of controllers, and then of course service providers. So the big question is there just one controller? And we've played around with this. As you have all these different controllers coming from their sweet spots, the question is, will the industry evolve to just one? And so we play around. I usually put down the question mark. Al actually, Blackburn, every once in a while puts an X. But we don't know. We don't know. We know the industry is trying to, say, I've won, I'm the one, and so forth. But actually, AT&T is in all these spaces, and good or bad, using a lot of these different controllers. And we are realizing they have their sweet spots. And it's not obvious to us yet, even though maybe some of us have private opinions of what that means, that there really can be one. But since AT&T is playing in all these spaces because we have to, we're realizing then, hopefully, we're hoping maybe by the end of next year we'll have a better feel for at least what really is in common in the industry, what needs to really stay separate, or maybe they just need to keep evolving in their own space. So one of the values of actually us being in the middle of all this domain too, I joked around when we first started this 2 or 3 years ago, in the corporation, people were run away from us because we were doing such radically different things. But once it came from CEO down, officer down, we had the other experience of everyone coming to us saying, okay, tell us what this is, and well, fine, we want to get onto this. Even though it was a lot, I calculated it's about 50 projects that we went through and still going through on this whole analysis of getting onto this platform. And one thing that was very valuable in going through all those use cases, I mean, 50 is a lot, that you start seeing a cadence that is common in all of them. And then it becomes more apparent in the industry, we're all hitting the same thing. And so these are the common use cases. And so basically the first is you instantiate a virtual function. And so you have day 0 of trying to set that up. Once you get over that, then I say there's a set of trigger points that causes the virtual function to move, or you have to expand and so forth, and you got to instantiate, and there's access that goes with that. And so that's when you get into these different triggers, a server failover, a site failover, scaling in and out, a customer asking for something which causes a virtual function to get instantiated, and then you have to set up that access. And when you go through all that, there's this whole relationship of the orchestrators with the controllers as you actually go down these different use cases. And that's really what Brian's going to go through more in depth of, due to that cadence, then what are the things we had to decide as a corporation? And one of the things that we actually want in the industry, there's a lot of different ways to work the cadence between all these orchestrators and controllers that will work. But as an industry, I think it would be more effective if we can all at least agree on a cadence so that we can all be marching in the same direction, so we can sort of, I joke around, get on with life, so that service providers can get back to just instantiating new services versus worrying about these platforms, and the network function or virtual network function or virtual function, people can just focus on their apps versus worry about this platform, and then of course the platforms can do the platform. Okay, I'm done.
Are we up?
Here. Do I? Oh, wait, what happened? Here.
There we go.
Thanks.
Okay, so now put on your breathing apparatus. We might take a little bit of a deeper dive in some of the ODL technologies that we're using and how the global controller fits into the overall architecture. This is my cave art picture, generated roughly about 2013 when we first started looking more closely at what controller we wanted to use and how we would put our applications on top of it. The biggest thing to kind of highlight for you is we've put an application on top of the OpenDaylight controller that allows us to do this service to network to device modeling, heavy user of Yang tools, et cetera, and then addition of some service logic interpreter custom software that allows us to navigate how we fill out the Yang models for service, network, and device. And all of that, and there's a lot of blank space on this chart because we took out some detail that kind of matters to us but probably doesn't matter to you yet, of how we marry the kind of left brain that worries about event-driven processing to make safe, stateful change in the network through adapters, and the right brain of a controller that is this closed loop, looking at telemetry, deciding that the network is either okay, no change required, or out of tolerance, and we need to go make a change. That network resource controller piece on the right-hand side there is that closed loop control. And everything we're doing in eComp, and you probably picked this up from Al's talk yesterday, is how do we drive OpEx out of the business to get to lower cost points. And that driving the OpEx out is closed loop control, policies, telemetry, and robust APIs down into network devices to make those happen. So the adapter layer, which in OpenDaylight you have a rich set of adapters, that's key to us. Both the open source adapters, netconf, PCEP, OpenFlow, et cetera, as well as more proprietary adapters that we have to add in for dealing with legacy devices, dealing with vSphere and other kinds of things. So that's kind of what this high-level picture shows. We are also heavy users of the Neutron agent because of our OpenStack involvement, and doing a lot of mapping on that side. So if I move on maybe to a prettier picture to bring us back into or up to 2015, this is the broader envelope of what's going on inside eComp. At the top, the OSS, BSS layer for traditional systems sending in orders that go into our service orchestrator, as well as the infrastructure portal when we want to spin up new capabilities. That service orchestrator is where we have our recipes for what do we do first, what do we do second, what is the management of when we have to go get resources out of a controller and prepare a package that goes down to an OpenStack instance to bring up a VNF, bring up changes in the network. The green controller in the middle, if you see a Brian Freeman view graph and it's something that's green, then that means it's an SDN controller. Some of the vendors have picked up on this, and so when they come talk to us, all their controllers are in green, so that's kind of nice to see. But the controller framework here, I want to highlight two things. The left part of that slide is a network controller. Think of layer 2, layer 3 networking, a directed graph in our environment that makes those safe, stateful changes in the network. The right-hand side is an application controller. When you break down OpenDaylight, the power of Yang tools, MD-SAL, and all that good stuff, you don't have to be doing layer 2 and layer 3 networks. We're actually going to be using an application controller to configure and manage VNFs that do voice, that do mobile applications, et cetera. That the fundamental technology is reusable in layer 4 through 7 as well. And we hope to share the technology across those. Filling out the rest of the eComp, critical pieces are the data collection and analytics engine that reads the telemetry from the network. It reads topology from our active available in inventory and applies policies from the Brown policy box and pushes those events back into the controllers to make safe stateful changes to the network. You know, multiple closed loop controls going on, local to the cloud, at the network layer, at the higher level service layer in our environment. And lastly, perhaps under advertised, but most important box, the blue one, the ASDC, embracing service creation, because as was mentioned earlier, you know, the rate at which we can bring new features into the marketplace is not what the business needs. We need to do it faster. And so we're investing heavily in service creation technologies to be able to create new Yang models, create new adapters, distribute that logic into our environment and do it much better, much faster than we have in the past, okay? So that brings us to a set of things we've observed as we have used OpenDaylight and done a variety of applications, built our own adapters, built our own services on OpenDaylight, deployed the first one for network on demand, and then, as Margaret indicated, a long list of applications that are going to be brought on board. The first is a problem with closed user groups in networking, as we've tried to build things like a VPE that might be owned by an internal tenant for the internet service in the company, but customer edge routers owned by their individual subscribers. We have this problem that Neutron network crosses tenants, and we don't want to make it an admin tenant that is accessible to everybody. We really need to have closed user group capability in the networking. And we think ODL, in partnership with OpenStack, really needs to help us get to that kind of interaction and data model, et cetera, for these kinds of closed user group tenant capabilities. The second one on the list is heat templates. My joke is heat templates are hot for us, but I always have to explain my jokes to kids, so maybe it's not that funny. But we're a heavy user of heat templates right now, and we really like that approach of having a standardized template for the bringing up of a multi-VM VNF, defining the networking that VNF needs, and attaching into it. We see the limitations in Neutron ML2, and we're going to be working with folks on how might we extend heat resources to add more capabilities for the kinds of networking and VM to VM relationships, VM to external WAN relationships that we need. Okay. Another kind of use case here is clustering. Clustering has been challenging in the helium environment. It's getting better in the lithium environment. I think we all recognize as you start talking about global deployments of OpenDaylight instances, we will have HA clustering 3 to 5 nodes in a cluster in a particular location. We will always have a DR site, whether it's active-active or active standby, but then there will also have to be regions of controllers that talk to each other. So local, regional, national forms of controllers that have both east-west clustering capability across locations, as well as some form of north-south parent-child kind of relationship will be needed. And so this will have to be an active area that people invest in if carriers are going to have to depend on, use, scale out OpenDaylight clusters across the globe, right? Similarly, we're heavy users of MD-SAL. That, in fact, to me, the Yang tools, MD-SAL, That's the secret sauce in an OpenDaylight installation, where we love the capability of being able to take from concept to working kind of prototype in a matter of hours using the Yang tools and the MDSL modeling. But there are some things that are missing, that we would need in dealing with the Yang tools that are out there. As I've mentioned before, we have an application called a Service Logic Interpreter that allows us to enable service designers in a non-coding environment to create the paradigms and the decision trees for filling out those Yang models. As it updates config trees and makes decisions on what IP addresses, what VLAN IDs, what inventory needs to be updated, et cetera, we run into this situation is where we need to diff Yang trees, diff branches, do merges and splits, et cetera. And there's work going on in this space, but there needs to be more added so that we can do auditing, compares, merge different branches of a Yang tree, et cetera. We'd also, as a nudge, would love to have an on-data commit hook that would allow us to do our processing before a response goes back on a RESTconf update. That's a little problem we have right now, so we have to use RPCs instead of using straight RESTconf in our environment. So it would be a nice to have for us. Okay. Lastly, in terms of, or not lastly, next, traffic routing control. We really are embracing the BGP and PCEP adapter in OpenDaylight. We want it to be extended to support more flow spec capabilities. That's a sweet spot for us in terms of some of our wide area networking that we do and places that we need to put in various flow redirection capabilities, both for DDoS protection as well as wide area network load balancing. There's some extensions in BGP for flow spec that need to be added in particular the BGP add path would be nice to have. And we love to work with the community on that. And we're also planning to actively use PCEP for wide area network tunnel updates, MPLS tunnel updates. And that will be one of the major things we do is push back bug fixes and design changes in the BGP adapter. Next on the list on NetConf, we are a champion of NetConf, and for the vendors in the audience, you've probably heard us say we would love to have NetConf adapters on all the devices and virtual machines that or VNFs that you come in with. There are some people who have NetConf capability, but for some strange reason don't have any Yang models for their NetConf, and or don't support get schema as part of their interface. We would be encouraged to see some people working on a NetConf Lite, better ways to deal with legacy equipment that doesn't support the full NetConf 1.1 protocol, but a way to kind of bridge them into the network. Those PNFs out there that we have to deal with for a variety of reasons would be nice to be able to have a NetConf Lite that could work with them. That would deal with both new generation physical and virtual devices, as well as some older legacy equipment that we deal with. And some of the, as you move into the application space, people that can't spell NetConf and Yang might make it easier for them to get on board if they could do kind of like the minimal NetConf support that's needed in that space. Okay. Layer 3 multi-tenancy, we talked a little bit about this in an earlier slide. Today, there is a lot of situations where we use neutron routers to get around layer 3 problems inside data centers. We want to move to a space where we have a virtual router with VRF capability inside the hypervisor or adjacent to the hypervisor, where we can start customers' AVPN connections at the base of the hypervisor. And with that capability, we can do some really neat things inside the data centers and avoid hairpinning through the WAN gateways, reduce the utilization on the edge routers, and a variety of different things like that. Okay. What that also would allow us to do, and we want to highlight for folks, is we can do hub and spoke networking inside the data center. So that what this means is the vRouters on a particular server or hypervisor would have different configurations. So you have different import and export route targets on the VRFs that are part of the hypervisor or vRouter, vSwitch layer for the customer. A lot of the vendors that we're working with today and looking at kind of make assumptions that there's the same policy for all the vRouters across the nodes, but you need to have the capability to control import and export route targets throughout the OVR, OVS environment for those. Okay, so a lot of different features. What I want to highlight is we're an active, as you heard, active user of OpenDaylight. We are using OpenDaylight as an SDK, and we're putting our own applications on it. A variety of different services, both in layer 0 through 1, layer 2 and 3, layer 4 through 7, all using the OpenDaylight platform in one way, shape, or form or another for advanced control, advanced operation, advanced closed loop control of the network. And I will turn it back to Margaret.
I want to apologize. I have a son whose name is Brian. That's why I wrote off my tongue. Well, so we have time for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? Oui. I'll have to repeat. They don't have mics. Yeah.
My name is from China Mobile. Yeah. So I see you have global controller idea. So we already have a super controller. We work with a couple of different controller providers.
Okay.
We have orchestrator on top. We find models, control microcontroller. It's very similar to what you're talking about.
Oh, so China Mobile said that, Hui just said that China Mobile actually has a very similar design as us of a global controller, federation controllers, because you have other, I'm going to paraphrase hopefully, other service providers and customers as well as these local controllers? Okay. And so you've already deployed it. Okay, well, good. Was it based on ODL, though?
Local controller, some of them using.
Oh, so local controllers, some are using ODL and some are not. Okay. No, well, it's very similar to us. Well, you're seeing the same thing as us. You've got controllers that have sweet spots.
Yeah, we want something global orchestration.
Okay.
Right. So one question to Freeman. We define both Tosca model and the YAM model because we have both virtualized resources. But today you're mostly talking about YAM model here. So what do you think about?
We have active debates on Yang versus Tosca. I would say not daily, but every couple of weeks it pops its head up. We're heavy into Yang for the lower layer network models. The orchestration folks really like Tosca, and so we're split-brained. Orchestration is more Tosca, BPEL focused, et cetera. But whenever we get into the control layer, both layer 4 through 7 as well as layer 0, 1, 2, 3, we're focusing on Yang.
Exactly. So for the network part, we are using definitely YAM model.
Yes.
For virtual resource, we have to keep using the Tosca.
Right. So higher level orchestration, there's more tools in that space that are Tosca oriented. So.
All right. Thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, just to let you know, Brian, we just formed this governance, technical governance team, and Brian actually is the technical side of this governance team. So when it comes, because you can imagine, because you have the same thing, you have this huge company, and if everyone were left to their own devices, they'd all optimize and you'd have nothing in common. And so we actually created this technical governing board where as everything comes in and as we have this vision of what we want common, the details actually is going through this board of deciding yes, no, maybe so. So at least we have a framework, especially when we start doing the one-offs, if I call it that, or maybe not, it becomes more normal. Actually this team that he's leading actually is responsible for really deciding, yet recognizing the spirit of what we did. I mean, the value proposition, the value thing is that we started this before even Domain 2.0 even existed. So we're already going down this path. So you have a set of folks who have been here since the inception who created the whole thing, actually. And then the reasons why we created it, which is not that easy to put in paper. And so now that we're going into execution mode, the good thing is you've got the folks who created a lot of these ideas now in the middle of the execution because that's where you're hitting reality. That's where you're realizing, okay, sound great on a slide, sound great as a principle, and then you're realizing, where you have to change and what works and what doesn't work. So that's the good thing about AT&T. It's a small group to really help figure out technically what we should do when and how.
Yeah, the governance council and everybody, I think all the service providers are going to run into the same thing. we have a DevOps person, we have a more traditional IT person, we have a next generation networking person. Getting those 3 people get to vote on any inter-system issue and any architectural change within a system to try and make sure we're picking the best of the pigs right now. No one has the perfect solution. And it will change over time, but we kind of like the tooling we have. It can get better, but we see we're nowhere near where we need to be by the time we grow up for this, right? And I'm sure you're running into the same things.
So my only recommendation for service providers and even vendors, but it's hard. I mean, we were lucky that we had John Donovan as our leader to truly get the officers on board. But even how you organize, you need a group of folks who actually have the breadth and even the depth to know how to put this whole thing together. And then as your company is all over the place trying to help execute, you really need to get back. You have to recognize the core group that really understands this intuitively, if I say it that way, so that if they can help guide it, they will actually help sort of rationalize and keep everything together as everyone's all over the place. And so I don't know, it's because no one else understood this than us. they just all come back to us because it's so complex. And so in some sense it's useful, but at least we can get us all going sort of in the hopefully the same direction.
Yeah, and I think one of the things AT&T in this particular project, we were downloading from OpenDaylight.org and the Nexus and building it ourselves. We've now switched to use a vendor's distribution of OpenDaylight as for our SDK. But we've kind of lived through the hydrogen, the helium, probably like you have, those upgrades. We're studying lithium right now, planning our upgrade strategy, which will be interesting for us. And enjoying the ride as we're going along, and finding out in the lab those times when you do the install and it doesn't come up and you get 404 errors out the wazoo. So love all that stuff. We got
2 minutes. 2 1/4.
So I got a question that might be a quick answer, but are you using versioning for your recipes and or your Yang and netconf config?
We are using versioning for the recipes for sure. The netconf and Yang is a little bit, or the Yang is a little bit more difficult, as was mentioned in one of the details yesterday. Date as the version stamp on the Yang models is a little interesting for us.
How are you using the versioning? How are you using the features given to your architecture from the?
We're currently working on our 3rd release, so we're using those versions to deal with, as we've added more features and functions into our RPCs. We're using those recipes to deal with. Now this service order has additional features that are possible to be dealt with. So we're using a particular BPEL engine for that. I don't know how to explain more than that. The standard ways you would imagine versioning recipes that come in. And then on the Yang models, we're training our people. You may have heard we've put into, or plan to put into open source our Yang tools, Eclipse plugin, Yang Designer, Eclipse plugin, so that our systems engineers need to kind of learn how to build Yang models, and as they change, make sure you do things like don't rename a leaf. I mean, that's this is relatively simple stuff, but grow functionality. Don't make sure you're backwards compatible between release N and release N+1. Those kinds of things are what we're because Yang is not as forgiving perhaps as some of the other things in that space with respect to versioning. So.
Okay, we have 1 minute or 37.
Yeah,
30 seconds.
right here. There was a presentation yesterday about OpenConfig.
Yes.
You mentioned that you're a big fan of NetConf. I'm wondering, what your thoughts on that are, and if you're doing any work with that project.
Yeah, we have, I think.
Oh, we started the project with
the Google folks, but
with
yeah.
the Google folks. I mean, before the whole thing became more public. I mean, we we basically started the project with Google, and then we pulled in other folks, actually.
Yeah. So we have active, participants, both through Kevin and Jim Yutaro, I think, right?
Yeah, so in fact, Kevin, so the person who, in fact, my understanding on ODL, right, the code that Kevin gave you for this Yang Design Studio, It's actually somehow on the ODL website somewhere, because I know some folks have already downloaded it. Anyhow, the gentleman who created that is actually the gentleman who's on the OpenConfig.
Right.
So I mean, it's sort of exciting. So he actually has a version where you can actually download the IETF versions, because we're using these configs, so that at least the framework is there, and then of course we change what we need to change and so forth. So he's starting to tie in all the standard versions of Yang models into this tool as a base, and then you go from there. So yeah, this is all very intertwined.
So what we was mentioning to somebody yesterday, what we want to be able to do with the Yang designer capability is encourage, if not force, the service designers to reuse the OpenConfig Yang models instead of starting from scratch and starting to create their lists and lists and containers. There's already a BGP model, there's already IP address models, et cetera, et cetera. Use those, and maybe we'll add some customization, add to it, but don't change the base grouping that you would use for BGP, PCEP, et cetera, et cetera. But we're actively working with the Google folks.
I mean, to give a pitch, it's like, is there value in everyone having their own configuration of doing very similar things? There is no value there.
Yep.
So that's why I do encourage the vendors and the users to do it once, combine and agree, because there really is no IP value in it.
Right. It's just more bugs that'll happen.
It's just not worth
And
it.
we don't like bugs, and we're kind of a nasty customer sometimes when we see bugs.
So I think we're done. Right? No more questions. So, you can get a hold of us, after this.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.